Morning. Sí desayunaron, muy bien. We welcome all of you to this special session, which is the continuation of the SETI's Global Impact Series. Over the years, we've tried to bring to the academic community, to students, faculty, alumni, trustees, the community in general, the opportunity to be exposed to different ideas, insights, and perspectives offered by international leaders. As a higher education institution, we educate young minds by teaching them how to think, not what to think, and providing experiences that inspire students and broaden their worldview. Just a week ago, we had the opportunity to host another renowned speaker, educator, president of the Institute for International Education, Dr. Alan Goodman, who commented about the importance of having a globally competitive preparation, thereby continuing the effort to promote global understanding and building bridges. Today, we are honored to receive a world-renowned personality who has helped describe the big trends shaping the world today and the skills and lifelong learning that graduates need to become successful in these ever-accelerating times. Bestseller of The World is Flat, and Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist known for his direct reporting and sophisticated analysis of complex issues facing the world today. Winner of the distinguished Pulitzer Prize 3 times, covering stories from around the globe for the New York Times since 1981, and among the Wall Street Journal's most influential business thinkers, U.S. News and World Report's America's Best Leaders, and foreign policy's top global thinkers. With you today, Thomas Friedman. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fernando. It's great to be here at SETI's. I'm just going to ask if you could put your cell phones on silent or stun, just so they don't interrupt the person sitting next to you. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk this morning for about 50 minutes or so on my book, Thank You for Being Late, which is really the framework through which I look at the world today. And as I do, one of the things I hope you'll appreciate is one of the ways or sort of the most fundamental way I look at the world today, something one of my teachers, Lynn Wells, taught me is never think in the box. Never think out of the box. Today you have to think without a box. What I hope I can persuade you of is that if you think without a box today, if you blend multiple different perspectives in a time of rapid change, you'll be able to see the world much more clearly. Thank you for being late. Whenever people hear the title of the book, the first question they always get is, where from comes that title? Thank you for being late. It actually comes from meeting people in Washington, D.C. for breakfast where I live. And every once in a while, someone would come. I have business breakfast so often downtown, and every once in a while, someone would come 10, 15 minutes late. And they'd say, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And one day, about 3 years ago, an energy entrepreneur, Peter Corcel, came, and he was 15 minutes late and did the usual, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I just spontaneously said to him, actually, Peter, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected 2 ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. Well, people started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down, to reflect. In fact, one of my favorite quotes in the book is from my teacher and friend Dov Seidman, who says, you know, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to be doing a lot of that today. So this book was actually triggered when I paused and engaged with someone I wouldn't normally engage with. So I actually live in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And about once a week, I take the subway to work. And for me, that means driving from my home in Bethesda to downtown Bethesda. I park in the underground garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt, and I take the Red Line subway into Washington, D.C. to the New York Times Bureau right near the White House. I did that 3.5 years ago now, parked my car in the parking lot, got my time-stamped ticket, took the Red Line into D.C., spent the day at the New York Times, Red Line back, car, time-stamped ticket, drove to the cashier's booth, handed it to the cashier. He looked at it and looked at me and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, great, parking guy reads my column. He said, I don't always agree. I thought, get me out of here. But I actually said, well, that's good. It means you always have to check. And I drove off thinking, it's great, parking guy reads my column. Anyways, a week later, I took my weekly trip into D.C., parking lot, timestamp ticket, Red Line, D.C. office, Red Line back, car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth. Same guy's there. This time he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor. Whoa, what just happened? So I said, well, write it down for me and I'll look it up. So he tore off a piece of receipt paper and he wrote on it, odanambi.com. I went home, I called it up right away on my computer. Turns out he's Ethiopian, writes about Ethiopian politics from the perspective of the Oromo people, pro-democracy advocate. It was a little rough, but it wasn't bad. Anyways, I thought about him for a couple days. I shared it with my wife, and I eventually decided this was a sign from God. I should pause and engage this guy. But I didn't have his email, so the only way I could do it was park in the parking garage every day. So I parked there for 4 straight days. Finally, at 7 a.m. in the morning, we overlapped. I stopped under the gate, got out of my car. I said, Ayile, now I know his name, Ayile Bojia, I want your email because I want to send you a message. So he tore off another piece of receipt paper and wrote me his email. And that night, we began an email exchange. I repeat them. I saved them all in the book, in which I basically said to him, I have a proposition for you. I will teach you how to write a column in the New York Times if you will teach me and tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. So we agreed to meet 2 weeks later at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda. And I came with a 6-page memo on how to write a column in the New York Times. And he came with his life story. Ethiopian grad of Haile Selassie University in Addis Ababa, studied economics, became a political activist, pro-democracy and pro the Oromo people. He eventually was thrown out of Ethiopia for political reasons. We welcomed him in America as a political exile. We used to do that. And he began blogging on Ethiopian websites, but he discovered they were just too slow. They wouldn't turn his stuff around fast enough. So he decided to start his own blog. And now, Mr. Friedman, he said to me, I feel empowered. His Google metrics say he's read in 30 different countries. This is my parking guy. And it's a wonderful story about how anyone today can participate in the global conversation. Well, I then presented him with my 6-page memo on how to write a column for the New York Times. And I never put it together this way until I did for him. And I explained to him that a news story is meant to inform. So I could write a news story about this event today at SETIS, and President Fernando would tell me whether I informed better or worse. But a column, what I write, an opinion article, is meant to provoke. It's meant to produce a reaction. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I'm either stoking up an emotion in you or I'm illuminating something for you. And if I do it really well, I do both and produce heat and light. But I explained to him that to produce heat and light requires a chemical reaction. And you need to combine three chemicals. The first is what is your value set? What are your deepest beliefs? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, a libertarian, a Keynesian, a Marxist? What is the core value set you want to share with the world? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. Because as a columnist, I'm always looking at the world and constantly updating my notion of how the machine works. What are the biggest pulleys and gears that are shaping the world? Because basically what I'm trying to do is take my value set and push the machine in that direction. And if I don't know how the machine works, I either won't push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. So I think it's very important to have a basic take on how you think the world works. And lastly, what have I learned about people and culture? Because there's no column without people. There are no people without culture. Now stir those three together, your value set, how the machine works, and your sense of different people and culture and how they react to the machine when it moves and how the machine is affected by their reaction. Meld those together, stir them up, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes, and if you do it right, you can produce a column in the New York Times. And you'll know if it's a column by the reactions you get. If people read your column and say, I didn't know that, that's good. You created some light for people. If they read your column and say, I never connected those things, that's good, more light. If they read your column and say, I never looked at it that way, more light. Your favorite as a columnist, that happens once every 4 months. People read your column and say, Mr. Friedman, you said exactly what I felt but didn't know how to say. God bless you. God bless you. Happens 4 times a year. I want to kill you dead, you and all your offspring. I get that too. That also happens more than 4 times a year. That means I produce some heat. But any of them are good. It tells me I'm producing heat and light. Well, the more I explained this to Aguile, my parking guy, the more I started to sit back and say, well, if that's what a column is about, what's my value set? Now, those of you who read me know that I'm not quite a liberal. I'm certainly not a conservative. It's because I have a quirky set of values that actually derive from the small town in Minnesota where I grew up. How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned about people and culture? And I decided that was the book I wanted to write. And that's what Thank You for Being Late is all about. The first half is about how the machine works today. What are the biggest gears and pulleys shaping your world? And how is that machine today not just changing your world, but reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the community, and the workplace. So let's talk about both halves. How does the machine work today? Well, I think what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways on more days, is that we're in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations all at the same time with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. Now, Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world. If you put them on a graph, they look like a hockey stick. They look like Glacier National Park, 1913, Glacier National Park, 2012. They look like Lake Chad, 1963. Lake Chad, 2001, and it's even smaller today. They look like a graph of global average temperature. They look like reported instances of extreme weather. They look like world population growth throughout history. They all look like a hockey stick. The market for me is globalization, but not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships. That's actually been flat to going down lately. The globalization I'm talking about that looks like a hockey stick today is digital globalization. Where everything is being digitized and globalized through Facebook, Google, PayPal, MOOCs. Put them on a graph and they look like a hockey stick. Total data consumed per month, for instance. Or mobile cellular subscriptions in the US or Mexico, all the graphs look the same. And the last acceleration is in Moore's Law. So Moore's Law was coined by Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, in 1965, in a famous article in Electronics magazine. And he argued 53 years ago that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months. It's now closer to 30, but never mind. And the price would stay roughly the same. And that's what Moore's Law looks like on a graph. And after 53 years, Moore's Law is still alive and well. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. In fact, for the last 53 years, every year, someone has written an article saying, Moore's Law is over. Moore's Law is over. It's run its course. And for 53 years, what all those authors have in common is they were all wrong. This PowerPoint is running most likely on an Intel 14 nanometer chip. It has 37.5 million transistors per square millimeter. Your eye can't see it. Under Moore's Law, Intel right now has just started shipping its 10 nanometer chip. It has 100 million transistors per square millimeter. So if you think the world was fast last year, wait till this year. Now, what's the difference between a 37.5 million transistor chip and 100 million? It's the difference between a self-driving car that needs the entire trunk of the car to contain the brains of that car, and a self-driving car that needs just a little box under the front seat. So I believe these three accelerations are all interacting with each other. More Moore's Law drives more globalization drives more climate change and more solutions. And they are reshaping the world. I can't talk about all three, so I'm going to go in depth a little on Moore's Law, because it's really the driver of all the change. Now, one of the hardest things for the human mind to grasp is the power of an acceleration, of an exponential. So a few years ago, Intel decided to explain the power of the technological acceleration we're in. And they did it by taking a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle. And they said, what if this Volkswagen had improved at the same rate microchips have since 1971? And they calculated that if it did, that Volkswagen today would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost 4 cents to buy. That's the power of the technological exponential driving our lives. But my chapter on Moore's Law is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what's this guy talking about? 2007, such an innocuous year. Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year was kicked off at the Moscone Center in San Francisco when a guy named Steve Jobs introduced the first one of these babies, the first iPhone in January 2007, beginning a process that we're about halfway through of putting this device, which is a handheld computer actually, with more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission, that I hear doubles as a phone and a camera. We're about halfway to putting one of these babies into the hands of every person on the planet. That's how the year kicked off. In 2007, a company called Facebook, actually late 2006, opened its platform to anyone with a registered email address and broke out of high schools and universities, and in 2007 went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, maybe the most important software you've never heard of, called VMware, went public. VMware is what enables any operating system to work on any computer. It's the foundation of cloud computing. In 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of, called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, launched into the wild. Hadoop is what enables 1 million computers to work together as if they're one. That's called big data. Hadoop did not invent those algorithms, GFS and MapReduce. They were invented by Google. But as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, says in the book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was leave a trail of breadcrumbs of its big data algorithm for the open source community, and they reverse engineered it and created a free public version of it, and it's called Hadoop. It started in 2007. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called Github, opened its doors. Github today is the largest repository of open source software with some 15 million users. In 2007, this same company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, Google launched into the wild its own operating system. I think it's called Android. In 2007, a guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader. He called it the Kindle. May have caught that. And in 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer. It's called Watson. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco were attending the design conference that year, and they noticed that all the hotel rooms were sold out. But one of them had 3 spare air mattresses. And they thought, wouldn't it be cool if we rented these air mattresses out to people who couldn't get hotel rooms? And it worked out so well. In 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. That's why it's called Airbnb, after the founding 3 air mattresses. In 2007, an obscure and anonymous Japanese cryptocurrency expert wrote a paper about a cyber currency. He called it Bitcoin. In 2007, this happened. This is a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome. You'll notice it was $100 million in 2001. It falls to $10 million in 2006, and then in 2007, it goes over a cliff like an EKG heading for a heart attack, down to $10,000, almost in 1 year. In 2007, solar energy takes off, as does a process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves increased 35% in a year and a half. That is a staggering number because of fracking. In 2007, this is a graph of what social networks look like. So that white line is the cost of generating a megabit of data. And you notice it too goes down like an EKG heading for a heart attack in 2007. The blue line is the speed of generating that data, and you notice the 2 lines cross in 2008. That's close enough for government work. Oh, I always forget this one. Yeah, that's a graph of cloud computing. You'll notice the first year we have statistics is 2008. That's because the cloud was basically born as we know it today in 2007. In 2007, the internet crossed 1 billion users, actually late 2006, seems to have been a tipping point. In 2007, Intel for the first time went off silicon to extend Moore's law. It introduced non-silicon materials into its transistors. In 2007, a company called Netflix streamed its first video. In 2005, Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, retired. And in 2007, he decided he better come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007 may be understood in time as certainly one of the greatest technological inflection points since Gutenberg. And we completely missed it. Why? Because of 2008. Yeah, right when our physical technologies just took off, like we're in a moving sidewalk at an airport that suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour. At the exact same time that happened, we entered the deepest recession since 1929. And it froze all our social technologies. The political reform, the social reform, the management reform, the education reform. So many social technologies froze just when they needed to adapt to this acceleration. And in that gap between what was happening in our physical technologies and what was happening in our social technologies, a lot of Trump and Brexit voters were born because a lot of people got massively dislocated. So what actually happened in 2007? What actually happened is that your laptop out there has 5 key components in it. It's got a Moore's Law processor, it's got a storage chip, it's got networking, it's got software, and it's got a sensor, it's got a camera. Well, what I do in the book is I trace how all 5 were actually in a Moore's Law, all accelerating. And what happened in 2007 is that they all melded together into this thing we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the term the cloud in my book because it sounds so fluffy, so soft, so cuddly, so benign. It sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. What I call this in the book is a supernova. For the science students among you will know the supernova is the largest force in the natural world. It's the explosion of a star. Because what happened in 2007 was a release of energy into the hands of men, women, and machines, the likes of which we have never seen before, and it changed 4 kinds of power almost overnight. It changed the power of one. Oh my goodness, what one person can do today as a maker or a breaker is unlike anything we've ever seen before. We have a president who can sit in his pajamas in the east wing of the White House and now tweet directly to 1 billion people without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter. I'm not going there. I'm not going there. I'm just saying. But here's what's really scary. The head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from his bunker in Raqqa province in Syria. The power of one today to be a maker or a breaker is unlike anything we've seen before. The power of machines have changed. Machines are now acquiring all 5 senses. We've never lived in a world where machines had all 5 senses. We crossed that line, I believe, on February 14th, 2011, on, of all places, a game show. There were 3 contestants on the show. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions, and the 3rd contestant simply went by his last name, Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson, of course, was an IBM cognitive computer. Mr. Watson passed on the first question, but he buzzed in before the 2 humans on the second question. See if you can get it. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino. And in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson said in perfect Jeopardy style, what is a shoe? What is a shoe? And for the first time, we got to watch live on TV a cognitive computer solve a pun riddle faster than 2 human beings. And the world kind of hasn't been the same since. It's changed the power of flows. So ideas now flow and change and congeal and then reform faster than ever before, as John Hagel points out. In the old days, you wanted to build up all your stocks. You wanted to have the most resources, the most land, the most stocks. Today, you want to be in touch with the most flows, because those stocks are depreciating so much faster. You want to be in the flow of ideas. Where did you want to build your town in the Middle Ages? You wanted to build it on a river. You wanted to build it on the Amazon, because what did you get? You got power, you got ideas, you got food, you got transport. Where do you want to build your town today? On Amazon.com. You want to build it on the flows, because they are now the source of nourishment and energy and jobs and ideas. And lastly, it's changed the power of many. We as a collective, human beings, when men and women and machines get disempowered, we become the largest forcing function on and in nature, which is why the new geological era is being named for us, the Anthropocene. I believe these 4 changes in power, they're not just changing your world. They are reshaping your world. And they're reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the workplace, and community. So let's talk about them. Let's start with the workplace, where all of the students here are about to enter. So before we talk about the workplace, I need to share with you one last graph. When I was working on the book, I went out to Google X, Google's research center, Advanced Research Center. It's run by a guy named Astro Teller. His title is Chief Astronaut. Astro's a good friend of mine. I laid out the thesis of my book, and he went over, he got some magic markers, and he went over to his whiteboard, and he drew this simple graph. I said, what's that, Astro? He said, well, that blue line across the middle, that's the average rate at which human beings and societies adapt to change over time. And you'll notice it has a positive slope, but it's very gradual. That's because we are used to adapting to change gradually. Then he drew that little white line underneath, and I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's technology. So at the left end of that line, back in the 11th or 12th century, you notice it was very flat. That's because things didn't change that much. Your bow and arrow didn't get better between the 11th and 12th century. There was no bow and arrow 2.0 in the 12th century. But then we got the scientific revolution, Copernicus, Galileo, and then eventually Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. The line starts to go straight north. And then Astro drew that little diamond there. And I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's where we are. We're at a point now where technology is evolving faster than the average human being and society can adapt to. Then he went and got another magic marker, and he drew that little dotted line. And I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's learning faster and governing smarter. And that's the challenge of SETIs, of every university and community today. How do we enable and empower our citizens and students to learn faster and govern smarter to meet technology where it's going in an age of acceleration? And that's why my chapter on the workplace is called How Do We Turn AI into IA? How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms so more people can learn faster and govern smarter? So let me give you an example of each one. My example of intelligent assistance, ANCE, is the Human Resources Department at AT&T. Big global telecom company, lives right next to the supernova, has 330,000 employees in a highly competitive global market. Pretty good chance that whatever is going on in the Human Resources Department at AT&T is coming to a Mexicali near you. So what's going on in AT&T's HR department? Well, basically what AT&T has done is put all their managers, 110,000 employees, on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So, Fernando's in there, he's on their in-house LinkedIn system. It shows all his academic achievements, shows all his work experience. Then they determined, I'm making up the number, but roughly 10 different skill sets that you're going to need to be a rising employee at AT&T that year. They always begin the year with their CEO, Randall Stevenson. giving a view of where the company is going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skill sets you're going to need. They determined there are roughly 10 skill sets you need to be a rising employee at AT&T that year. Then they take Fernando's CV and they see Fernando's got 7 of the 10 skills because he went to SETI's. He's a smart guy. It's a great university. But he's missing 3. Then they came to Fernando and they say, Fernando, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take nano degree courses that we, AT&T, have built in partnership with Udacity to get the skill sets you're missing. In fact, we heard, Fernando, you like computer science. We've also created a 1-year, $6,000 a year online master's degree in computer science with Georgia Tech. You want to take that? We'll pay for it as well. In fact, we heard you're interested in archaeology and the Incas. We're into learning. You want to take a course on that? We'll pay for it as well. Just one condition, Fernando, one condition. You have to take these courses at home, at night, on weekends, and on your own time, not on company time. Now, if Fernando says, you know, Mr. AT&T, I've climbed up one too many telephone poles. I'm not into this anymore. They now have a wonderful severance package for Fernando, but he will not be working at AT&T much longer. What is AT&T's new social contract with their employees? It's very simple. You can still be a lifelong employee at AT&T, but only if you're a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T. And that social contract is coming to a Mexicali near you. And that is why one of my tutors, Heather McGowan on education, likes to say, never ask your kid today what you want to be when you grow up. Because whatever it is, it's not going to be here unless it's policeman or fireman. Only ask your kid today how you want to be when you grow up. Will you have an agile learning mindset? Will you be predisposed to be a lifelong learner? That is the single most important competitive advantage in a world where the things you learn in the first year of your BA may be outdated by the 4th year. In a world where the notion you can get a 4-year degree and dine out on that for 30 years of your career is so 1950s. And that leads to the second most important competitive advantage you can have. And that was something one of my other teachers, Marina Gorvis, taught me. You know, if I were giving this talk here 15 years ago, a big part of the talk would be about the digital divide. The digital divide. San Diego's got internet and Mexicali doesn't. Mexicali's got internet and the village next door doesn't. America's got internet and Africa doesn't. The digital divide was a big issue. Today the digital divide is disappearing. It'll be gone, I bet, within 5 years. And when the digital divide is gone, the biggest divide in the world is going to be the motivational divide. Whose kids have the self-motivation to be lifelong learners long after they've left home and mom and dad are not there to say, Fernando, have you done your homework? That is what intelligent assistance is all about. Now, my example of intelligent assistant, ANT, is the janitorial staff at Qualcomm. Qualcomm, big chip maker. They made the chips actually inside your iPhone. They weren't made by Apple, made by Qualcomm and the software, a lot of it. That's why Apple's always suing Qualcomm over patents. Qualcomm has a 64-building campus up the road in San Diego. And 2.5 years ago, they took 6 of those buildings and they put sensors everywhere. Every light, every door, every window, every heating, cooling system, every faucet, every toilet, every sink, every computer, they put a sensor on it. And then they beamed all that data up to the cloud, up to the supernova, and then they beamed it down onto an iPad with an incredibly user-friendly interface for their janitorial staff. So if I leave my computer on or a light or pipe bursts above my head, the janitor knows it faster or as fast as I do, and they just need to swipe down to see how to repair it or who to call. Qualcomm has turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you think that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has an intelligent assistant enabling them to work smarter and learn faster. My example of intelligent algorithm is the partnership between Khan Academy, the online learning platform, and the College Board, which administers the PSAT and SAT exams that our students in America, and maybe you'd have to do here at SETIs, have to take to get into certainly any American university and maybe this one. Now, we all know the story. In 11th grade, we take the PSAT exam, the practice SAT, to see what we get in math and verbal and prepare us for the SAT exam. What a lot of American parents do who can afford it is they go out and hire a $200 an hour tutor in 11th grade to goose their kids' PSAT score in order for them to get into Harvard or Yale or SETIs, wherever they want to go. Turns out a completely rigged game. Because if you come from a family or neighborhood where you can't imagine hiring a $200 an hour tutor, you're at a real disadvantage. So 3 years ago, the College Board and Khan Academy partnered and created an intelligent algorithm for free PSAT and SAT prep. The way it works is, in 11th grade, I take the PSAT exam, I get the results back, it says, Tom. You did really well in verbal. You're very good in verbal. You could actually be a journalist one day. But you have a problem with math. In fact, it tells me I have a problem with fractions and right angles. It then takes me to a practice site just devoted to fractions and right angles. My exact weakness. Doesn't waste any time on my strengths. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that says, Tom, you could be in AP math. You could be in advanced placement math. Me? Moi? In advanced placement math? No one in my neighborhood's ever been in AP math. No one in my family. Yeah, you could be in AP math. If I do well there, it takes me to another site with some 200 college scholarships. Last year, 3 million American kids got free PSAT and SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. Last example, opportunity at work. So we in America, we've got about 32 million kids who started college and never finished. Some went 1 year, 2 years, 2.5, 3.5 years. They drop out of college. They then go to apply for a job. Their employer says, where's your BA? Sorry, got no BA. Sorry, no job. Sorry, no job. A huge waste of human talent. So we have algorithms that have emerged. One is opportunity at work, where you can go to them now, and they will actually measure what you learned in 1 year at SETIs, 2 years, 2.5, 3.5 years. They will then badge what you learned, and they will partner with companies to slot you in even without your BA. So I tell the story in the book of a young African-American woman, LaShawna Lewis, who went to Michigan Tech for 3.5 years, studied computer science, had to drop out for family reasons after 3.5 years, ended up driving the school bus to and from a computer school, couldn't make that up, and working on the help desk at a law firm, helping lawyers rediscover their lost passwords. She was discovered by Opportunity at Work. They measured her knowledge in computer science. They badged it. They partnered with MasterCard. They slotted her in at MasterCard as a systems engineer. Today, she's a senior systems engineer. And as she says in the last line of her interview in my book, and Mr. Friedman, I still don't have a BA. That is an intelligent algorithm. Now, I'm going to make you all a bet. I'm going to bet that none of you have heard of any of this. And that's because you were following our last election. You see, there is actually massive work going on helping people through the pipeline from education to work, but nobody is talking about it. You were following our last election where Donald Trump's big idea to help American workers was to destroy Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's big idea was to direct you to her website. And Bernie Sanders' big idea was to destroy the world's 6 biggest banks. Nobody's actually talking about the massive innovation going on the pipeline of education to work. And that's a real tragedy. But that's a good segue for me to how the world of politics is being reshaped. You see, I think we have to get out of our head the old industrial model of politics that it's about capitalism versus labor, right versus left. I think we're on a completely different spectrum. I think the way to understand politics today, whether in Mexico or in America, is to understand that we are in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. We're in the middle of a change of the climate. We're going from what I call later to now. So when I was growing up in Minnesota, later was when I could clean that river, salvage that lake, protect that forest, rescue that orangutan. I could do it now or I could do it later. Well, today, friends, later is officially over. Later will now be too late. So whatever you're going to rescue in the environment, please do it now. Because later is officially over. That's a climate change. We're in the middle of a change in the climate of globalization. For the reasons I argued, we're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. And in an interdependent world, first of all, your friends can kill you faster than your enemies. If Mexican, Italian, or Greek banks go under, I'm going to feel that heavily in America. Italy, Greece, they're in NATO, they're in the EU, they're allies, as is Mexico. But your friends can kill you now faster than your enemies in an interdependent world. And in an interdependent world, your rivals falling becomes more dangerous than your rivals rising. So if China takes 6 more islands in the South China Sea, personally, I couldn't care less. I will sleep fine. If China loses 6% growth, this room is half full. China kills us much more by falling than by rising in an interdependent world. That's a climate change. And lastly, we're in a change of the climate of business for all the reasons I described. Every company today, I argued in the world is flat. Whatever can be done will be done. Every business needs to understand technology because whatever can be done will be done. The only question is, will it be done by you or to you? But it will be done. So the question I'm always asking in business and technology is what can be done? And today what can be done is every company can and therefore must analyze, optimize, prophesize, customize, and digitize/automatize virtually every job, product, or service. What do I mean? In the world of big data, as a company now, I can find the needle in the haystack of my data as the norm, not the exception. As a company today, I flew across country by United Airlines. United Airlines GE engines are connected by sensors to GE, and they can advise United Airlines exactly what altitude to fly every mile to get the optimal energy efficiency. They can optimize. You may have seen the IBM Watson ad, where the repairman comes to a high-rise building and says, I'm here to fix the elevator. And the doorman says, I'm sorry, the elevator is not broken. And the IBM Watson repairman says, I know, but it will be in 6 weeks and 3 days. You can now prophesy. You can do predictive analytics on anything. You can customize just for university presidents in Mexicali named Fernando. And you can digitize and automatize more and more jobs, products, and services. You put those 5 together, they are a climate change in the world of business. Well, what do you want when the climate changes? I think you want 2 things. You want resilience, because you need to be able to take a blow when the climate changes. And at the same time, you want propulsion. You want to be able to move ahead. You don't want to be curled up in a ball under your bed waiting for the climate change to pass. So I thought about that, and I thought, who do I go to for advice as I was writing the book on how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew this woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she had dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up, I made an appointment, and I went out to see her. I sat down and I said, Mother Nature, how do you produce resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? She said, well, Tom, I got to tell you, everything I do unconsciously, but this is my strategies. First of all, she said, I'm incredibly adaptive. Oh, in my world, it's not the strongest that survive. It's not the smartest that survive. It's the most adaptive plant and animals that survive. I love adaptation. I do it in a rather brutal way through a process I call natural selection. Secondly, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see a blank space in nature, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. A third, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh my God, I love pluralism. I try 20 different species of everything, see who wins. I love diversity. In fact, she told me something interesting. She said that her most diverse ecosystems are also her most resilient and propulsive ecosystems. I love diversity, she said. Fourth, she said, I'm incredibly sustainable. Nothing is wasted in my world. Everything is food. Eat, food, poop, seed. Eat, food, poop, seed. Nothing is wasted. Fifth, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox in my thinking. I'll try any trees with any soils, any bees with any flowers. I'm incredibly, nothing dogmatic about me. Lastly, she said, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures. I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, my argument is that the university, the community, the country that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's killer apps for thriving and producing resilience and propulsion is the one that will thrive in this age of acceleration. And since I was writing my book in 2016, I decided to imagine, what if Mother Nature was running against Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? What would her platform look like? So I translated all those into a political party called Mother Nature's Political Party, which of course is just a proxy for my own politics. Now, I can't go into detail about it, but suffice it to say there are issues where Mother Nature is out there on the left, far left, with Bernie Sanders. Mother Nature would be for universal health care, because she would understand that in an age of acceleration, workers need to be mobile and have a base, a foundation for them in the healthcare realm. She'd be for some form of universal health care and stronger trampolines, because this world is going to be too fast for more people. But at the same time, Mother Nature would be out there on the right with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, because she would be for cutting all corporate taxes, only she'd do it smart, because she'd offset that with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. Unfortunately, in our world of politics in America, if you're for stronger safety nets, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. And if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for stronger safety nets. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid, that's what she'd call it. She will tell you you will never be resilient and propulsive unless you bring these two together. Right, left makes no sense when the issue you're up against is climate change in these three areas, not the Industrial Revolution. So much for politics. Let me conclude by talking about two realms that are being reshaped: ethics and community. Ethics. Why would this guy be talking about ethics? Well, my chapter on that subject is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Is God in cyberspace? Happens to be the best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I'm at the Portland Theater in Portland, Oregon. Young man stands up, I'm selling my book, Lexus and the Olive Tree. Young man stands up in the balcony at question time, says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. And I felt like a complete idiot. So I got home and I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know when I was a New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. His name is Tzvi Marks, a great Talmudic scholar. He now lives in Amsterdam. He's married to a Dutch priest, a very interesting character. I tracked him down in Amsterdam. I said, Tzvi, I got a question I've never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we actually have two concepts of the Almighty. One is biblical, one is post-biblical. The biblical concept says the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil and he rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, prevarication, and now we know fake news. But fortunately, he said, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God says God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we need to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. Well, I really liked his answer. I put it into the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree in 2000, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 20 years, almost. Anyways, I started working on this book, and I found myself spontaneously retelling that story. And finally, I sat myself down one day and said, why are you retelling that story? And it quickly became apparent to me for two reasons. One just happened last year. I think last year, we began living 51% of our lives in the developed world in cyberspace. And what is my definition of cyberspace? It's a realm where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. But cyberspace is now where we go to find a date, find a spouse, communicate with friends and family, buy a book, write a book, sell a book, buy a car, buy a house. We're now living our lives 51% in a realm where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. There's no courts in cyberspace, no police, no stoplights, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. But that's where we're now living 51% of our lives. We're, in other words, living 51% of our lives in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, we are now standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a human species. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us post-Hiroshima. And if it had to be one country, I'm glad it was mine. I think we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us, and where all of us could actually fix everything. We have never been to this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us. And with these powers of men, women, and machines now, we, for the first time, live in a world that if we put our minds to it, we could actually feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet. We have that power now. We have never been to this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could fix everything. And what does that mean? That intersection? It means we've never been more godlike as a species than we are today. We'll put those two together. We've never lived more of our lives in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more godlike. What does that mean? It means what everyone thinks, feels, and believes now matters more than ever. It means everyone needs to be in the grip of sustainable values. Everyone, at a minimum, needs to be in the embrace of the golden rule. Do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, because we now live in a world where you can do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before, and others can do unto you here in Mexicali farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Everyone today needs to be in the grip of sustainable values. Values matter more than ever, and at a minimum, the golden rule. I know what you're thinking again. I gave this as a commencement address at Olin College of Engineering a couple years ago. And I said to the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 so your kid could get an engineering degree. And who do they bring in as the commencement speaker? But some knucklehead preaching the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And I told them what I will tell you, that in this age of acceleration, naivete is the new realism. Because I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay in a world where men, women, and machines get disempowered and people aren't in the grip of the golden rule. Now that is naive. Where does the golden rule come from? It comes from two places, I believe. Strong families and healthy communities. That's where you learn to do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. I'm not an expert on strong families. I hope I built one. But I am an expert on healthy communities because I happened to grow up in one tiny little suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up in the 1950s, called St. Louis Park. So I'll tell you just a little bit about my little town, which had a huge impact on me and my values. My grandparents emigrated to America from Eastern Europe. They ended up in Minnesota. I have no idea how. There was a small Jewish community there. They called themselves the Frozen Chosen. Basically, Minneapolis was the capital of anti-Semitism in America in the 30s and 40s, and the Jewish community there lived in a ghetto with African Americans in the north side of the city. Not because we were integrated together, but because we were both isolated there. My parents couldn't join AAA, the driving club. It was ugly. Until Hubert Humphrey became mayor, cleaned it out of city government, really opened up the community. And after the war, the entire Jewish community of North Minneapolis moved out of the north side of the city. The African Americans couldn't get out. And they all moved virtually en masse to one little town called St. Louis Park. Between 1953 and 1956, it was the only town that didn't have restricted covenants on homes who they could sell them to and had enough housing stock. So in a 3-year period between 53 and 56, an entire community gets transformed. St. Louis Park went from 100% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian to 20% Jewish, 80% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian. If Sweden and Israel had a baby together, it would be St. Louis Park. Okay? And I tell the story of how we all got to build an inclusive community together, how we all learned to live together. And it was tough. There were broken hearts and broken dates and all those things. But over a 25-year period, we all learned to live together. And we had a pretty interesting high school, because I actually went to high school with the Coen brothers, the filmmakers, Al Franken, the senator, Norm Ornstein, the political scientist, Michael Sandel, the political theorist, Peggy Ornstein, the author, Alan Wiseman, the National Book Award winner, Sharon Isbin, the guitarist. We all went to the same little high school in this little Minnesota town in the 50s and 60s. In fact, the Coen brothers movie, No Country for Old Men, if you saw it, there's a scene where Churga blows up a car outside of a drugstore in Mexico. And at the end of the scene, to go in to steal drugs, at the end of the scene, the camera pans to the drugstore, and it's called Mike Zoss Drugs. That was our little St. Louis Park drugstore. Not anything in Mexico. Anyways, I tell this story about our community, where I learned the animating values that drive me. It's something we call in Minnesota, Minnesota nice. Minnesota nice. It had a deep civic ethic that we all took out into the world. I took it into journalism, the Coen brothers into films, Sandel into political theory, etc. Hard to explain Minnesota nice to people who haven't been there, but I give a couple examples in the book. When I was home working on the book, one of my closest friends, I was getting married, another dear friend of ours named Jay, came to the wedding, sat down with me and said, Tom, my wife, Eileen, was driving around the ring road in Minneapolis today, and a driver almost drove her off the road. And she came home and said, Jay, I was so mad I almost honked. That's Minnesota for road rage. When I was young, there was actually a mafia in Minneapolis. My dad happened to grow up with a lot of these guys. He wasn't in the mafia, I swear, but he happened to grow up with a lot of them. And when I was 5 or 6, my dad came home one day and said one of his best friends had been sent to jail. And I thought, oh my God, my dad knows someone in jail. And when you're a 5 or 6-year-old kid, you never forget when you ask your dad, Dad, what did he do? And he said, son, he was shopping in a store before it was open. That's Minnesota for breaking and entering. Okay. Anyways, all of this had a big impact on me, and I tell the story. I left Minnesota, my little town, in 1971 to discover the world, and for this book, I came back and discovered the world had found my little town. I went back to my high school. It's now 50% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian. It's 10% Jewish. Now it's 10% Latino and 30% Somali. Because the same little town that took the Jews 50 years ago took the Somali refugees. Now the inclusion challenge is so much deeper, so much larger, racially and religiously. But I tell the story of how they're doing, and they're doing pretty well, but it's a struggle, but they're really doing pretty well. Why do I tell you this story? Because I think in this age of acceleration, community becomes more important than ever. I think national governments today, yours and mine, are way too slow to adapt to these rapid changes. The single family is too weak to adapt to these changes. It's going to be the healthy, inclusive community that I think is the central governing unit of the 21st century. It's close enough to people and nimble enough and doesn't get torn apart by the kind of tribalism we're now seeing in Washington, D.C. or Mexico City. And the best communities today are doing that. They're able to adapt because they have large amounts of trust. And trust is what enables you to move quickly. One of my teachers in the book, Dov Seidman, says trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Where trust is high, people can move really fast. And if I were running for president, I'd be running on a ticket of progressive localism. How do I push more and more decision-making down to the highest trust level, which I think is the community? And when you go around America today, what you really find is people think our country is divided between two coasts that are liberalizing, pluralizing, diversifying, and then there's flyover America where everyone's supposedly high on opioids, voted for Trump, and waiting for 1950 to come back. That's actually not true. Our country is a checkerboard of high trust and low trust communities that are able to adapt to these accelerations. Which is why if you want to be an optimist about America today, stand on your head, because my country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down, okay? We do have communities that are thriving. And so I simply conclude with a couple of thoughts. One from my teacher who taught me all the physics in this book, Amory Lovins. Whenever people ask Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Amory says, look, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great. Everything will be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. I believe in applied hope. I'm hopeful, but I understand you got to apply smart leadership, smart decision-making if you want to see it come true. And I believe in applied hope because what I've seen traveling my country working on this book is the number of people applying hope, the number of people who want to get caught trying at the community level. And that's why my book has a theme song. As a theme song, I actually explored whether I could buy this song. So when you open the book, you would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. And the song is by one of my favorite singers, Brandi Carlile. The song is called the I-E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You see, my three accelerations, they're a hurricane. We have a president who's trying to build a wall to the hurricane to stop the wind. I'm trying to build an eye that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability where people can feel connected, protected, and respected. That is the healthy community. And I think the great struggle in our politics and Mexico's is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Friedman, for your presentation. Now we'll have some questions. They'll be led by Dr. Leon. And I think he has a question of his own, right?
And we have microphones if anyone has a question.
There are microphones. Can you raise them? Los micrófonos, levanten la mano para que los ubiquen. ¿Quién tiene una pregunta? Who has a question? Has to be in English. Only one at a time, please. Come on. Okay, up there. Okay. Up there, very way in the back. Ileana?
Where? Can you tell me your name and what you're studying?
Mr. Friedman, I'm in my last year of high school. and my name is Aldo Sainz.
Well, great thing.
And my question is democracy how we know it obsolete for the rapid change in technology? I ask this question based on two facts. That we are currently going through an electoral process here in Mexico, the 2018 elections, and most of the movements right now are either for continuing in the same track,
Right.
or regression, basically a return to normalcy. And there's this populism, just like in America, where, well, like Warren G. Harding in the 1920s, for example.
Yeah.
So, how can technology act in order to improve democracy or way of government and actually make a change?
Is democracy obsolete, in this age of acceleration? That's a really good question. Next question over here, please. Somebody was waving a hand up there. So I think about that a lot. It's a really important question you've asked. I've been thinking about it for a while. I wrote a book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, back in 2008, and I had a chapter in there called China for a Day. China for a Day. And I fantasized if only in America we could be China just for one day. Just for one day. Would it be so bad? One day. Where the government could sort of order from the top down all the changes and fixes we need, Would it be so bad? Of course, I said, no, I don't want to be China for a day. I don't want to be China for a second. But I want democracy to work with the same efficiency that you described in your questions, to be able to make changes, respond to changes as quickly as some top-down governments do. And if I felt that in 2008, I feel it even more 10 years later. Because our system's just not working. I covered the Middle East most of my adult life. And really, I've come back to Washington and discovered that the Middle East has followed me home. We're now all Sunnis and Shiites. We just call them Democrats and Republicans. But we're as tribalized as the people in the Middle East are, and we've seen what that's done for them. And it's happened for a lot of reasons: money in politics, gerrymandering of districts, media. You can now just get your news from people who agree with you. But I am very worried. I think democracy is not making a very good showing right now at the national level. But the reason I distinguish between the national level and the local level is, at least in America, I can't speak for Mexico, we do have a lot of towns where democracy is actually working very well. And that's because at the local level, somebody has to clear the snow, make the sewers work, create the electricity, and there's just much less partisan politics at the local level. And right now, what's propelling America forward, when we have this paralysis and poison tribal politics in Washington, is our healthy communities, and because we have a lot of global companies that don't have time for any of this, because they have to compete globally, like the AT&Ts, so they're creating their own education systems and whatnot. It's all working, but it's suboptimal. Imagine if we had a national government that was actually enhancing this rather than slowing it down and creating uncertainty. And so I don't have the answer for the question you've asked, but I do know it's the most important question to ask right now. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Have you here. Thank you very much for visiting our city,
Great to be
our
here.
country, and obviously our college here. I am very much enthusiastic about what you just said, that the main rule is values. And I think that referring to the question that was put to you before mine, I think that democracy is part of those values. It represents a set of values. So I think that we can do many, many more positive, constructive things for our community, for our country, if we just stick to those values, if we respect those values, starting at home and teaching at home that values is the rule that must be respected all the time. And don't expect that this be learned when you go to grammar school or high school. You have to start at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just pick up for that. Thank you. You know, one reason my book is called Thank You for Being Late is that it actually celebrates everything old and slow. My book actually believes, as I believe, that all the most important things today are all the things you cannot download. It's all things you have to upload the old-fashioned way. Good parenting to good child. Good teaching to good student. Good pastor to good flock. Good bureaucrat to good citizen. So people know that I'm not on social networks, okay? Because I happen to think the internet is an open sewer of untreated, unfiltered information. Oh my God, it's got diamonds and rubies and gold and silver in that flow. And it's got poison toxin, broken glass, rusty cans, and rusty nails. And if you don't build the internal filters into your citizens and kids to filter out the gold and the silver and the rubies from the rusty cans and rusty nails and broken glass, we're going to have a real problem. Because you can't be there when your kid's on the internet every time, or you're a citizen. And you got to build those filters in. And the only way to do that is the old-fashioned way. There's no app for that, okay? And so a lot of what I'm trying to do in this book is really to celebrate family and community as the ideal institutions to build those value filters, and they're going to just matter more than ever as we live more of our lives in that realm. So thank you.
We'll take one more.
Sure.
Here.
Hello.
What class are you in?
Rakesh Pengasa. I'm a professor of business administration coming from Yuma.
Great.
Mr. Friedman, thank you very much for such an illuminating talk.
Appreciate it.
I have often watched you on panel discussion with Fareed Zakaria, and I'm really, really impressed.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. Let me frame the question first, and then I'll give you the context. The question is whether a student is listening to a professor or any individual is watching a TV or reading newspaper. One question that should occur to the person is, how do I believe this is right? Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. Many people don't even care to ask that question. Many people who do, they have forgotten or they don't know how to do it. So what would be your strategy or suggestion for them? So that's the question. And the context I would like to post is, you mentioned about the power of one. Yeah, that goes both as a positive as well as negative. Any individual has a power to create a content, and it can be distributed to billions. And with the technology advancing at the Moore's law, the problem is that, you can create anything and it can go to, half the planet, all the planet, and, it can influence. And most of the time, the way the technology is being used is, as soon as you get a communication, people have stopped the idea of thinking,
Right.
reviewing it, and then responding. Speed has become important. Well, I responded to it in
Sure.
5 seconds. I responded in 3 seconds. So that's, it's a negative
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
The positive side is that, yes, if you have the right strategy, the right content, you can reach billions.
Yes.
So within that complexity, how would you respond to the question
Well,
that I
it's
posed?
a very important question. It's sort of a derivation of the one we just asked, in that we're talking about this upstairs earlier, which is, I think every school today, starting in first grade or kindergarten, needs to teach digital civics. Okay. I had to take civics when I was growing up in Minnesota. That is, what is the Constitution? What is the Declaration of Independence? How does our Congress work? How do our Supreme Courts work? How does our democracy work? I had to take a class in that, you know. And they don't teach that civics anymore like the way they did. But much more importantly, we need digital civics. So if you go to the internet and see a story that says, the Minneapolis Sun-Sentinel reported that Tom Friedman was once arrested for shoplifting. You see it, Minneapolis Sun-Sentinel, you know. The first thing you need to do is move horizontally and see if there really is a Minneapolis Sun-Sentinel. And that needs to become part of our habit. Not saying, did you see Tom Friedman was arrested for shoplifting? And send that to 10 people, and the 10 people send it to 10, and pretty soon you're chasing it all over the world. We need to be teaching digital civics to our kids from first grade. How do you use the internet? Because so often I'll hear people say, but I read it on the internet. As if that settles the bar bet, you know, because it comes in this patina of technology, you tend to want to believe it, when in fact it's nothing of the kind. So I think we have to really, you know, again, reshape education of teaching young people how to actually use these tools in an effective way by triangulating and never just taking a fact, however clear it may look, as the gospel. And it has to be a strategy. It starts in first grade and should go through all 4 years here at SETI's in different ways.
On that, thank you very much, Mr. Friedman. And on that note, I'd like to...
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Dr. Friedman very much for joining us and sharing with us his valuable insights. And I would like to take a gift we have for you. So take it with you. It's a jacket and one of our books. Okay. So it's nice and cold. Okay, and also if you could smile for the camera down there, our official photographer is going to take the official photograph. Okay, thank you all for being part of the SETI's Global Impact Series, and have a great day. Thank you.